Dragon Quest III is one of the best RPGs I've ever played. Let me preface this by saying that I'm referring to the recent 2024 HD 2D remake, as the original game was a little bit before my time. But man, this game is something special. I know the original version has always been considered one of the greatest RPGs ever, so I had high expectations when I started playing the remake a couple of weeks ago. And yet, even my loftiest of expectations have been exceeded. This game is magical. As you can probably tell, this is going to be a pretty straightforward video. Today I just want to gush about my time with Dragon Quest III and explain why this game is so special and why we need more RPGs like this in today's gaming landscape. And if you're on the fence about this title, then hopefully by the end of this video I will have convinced you to add it to your list, because this game is something that all RPG fans should experience. So with all that being said, let's dive into just what it is that has me so over the moon for this title. The first thing that really jumped out to me during my time with Dragon Quest III is just how light on story it is. You're the child of a legendary hero, and it's up to you to stop a bad guy. At this point in the adventure, I'm not even really sure what he's trying to do. Take over the world? Envelop it in darkness? Honestly, I have no idea. I just know that it's my job to stop him, and that's good enough for me. I understand for some people this lack of story might seem like a negative, but personally, I'm loving it. Dragon Quest III puts its gameplay and its world first and foremost, and the story is more there just to propel you along the way. For me, this has been a breath of fresh air when compared to the majority of modern day RPG offerings. I love a good video game story as much as the next person, but as so many modern RPGs continue to grow in size and scope, sometimes the stories can be a little bit much. For example, I've been trying to chip away at Metaphor ReFantazio for the last couple of weeks, and I recognize that it is a special and extremely well-made game, but man, the abundance of story in that title has been a bit tiring for me. And I like Metaphor's story too. It's intriguing and engaging and keeping me invested for the most part, but sometimes I sit down to play the game and realize that I barely touch the controller for 30 or 40 minutes. Oftentimes it feels like I'm engaging with a TV show more than a video game. And maybe that is more of a me problem. My attention span is embarrassingly bad these days, but the point stands that it's in no way a problem with Dragon Quest III. It's a game that gives you a couple of dialogue boxes, maybe a 1-minute cutscene, and then sends you on your way. And I've been loving the hell out of that aspect of it. Now, of course, this extreme emphasis on gameplay would be an issue if the gameplay wasn't up to snuff, but fortunately, the gameplay and mechanics on display in Dragon Quest III are some of the best I've seen in the RPG genre. Don't get me wrong, they're pretty simple, which makes sense considering the original version of this game released in 1988, but despite the simplicity, it's all very, very addicting. It's standard RPG stuff. You venture around an overworld, get into battle via random encounters, and constantly grow and strengthen your party as you travel from town to town and conquer dungeon after dungeon. As simple as it all is, it's amazing to me how perfected the entire system feels, especially considering the original game's age. Combat is simple on the surface, but the layers and intricacies of it really begin to reveal themselves the more you play. The real star of the combat system is the nuanced and impressive job system, but more on that in a minute. The combat itself is quick and snappy. You can set your party members to various different tactic settings, such as show no mercy or fight wisely, and you can let the CPU handle the heavy lifting, or if you're a control freak like me, you can set them all to follow orders and choose each of their commands yourself. It's a great system, and even I quickly found myself letting the computer handle themselves for much of the adventure, since the AI is actually very capable. Then I would take control back only when it was really needed, such as in a particularly challenging boss fight or dungeon. You also have the ability to greatly increase the speed of text and battle animations, which is hugely appreciated and something that I think all RPGs should have these days. Maybe one of the only flaws in this game is that the random encounter setting seems to be just a touch too high at times, so the option to speed things up really goes a long way. But like I said before, the real highlight of the game's combat is its job or vocation system. Dragon Quest III allows you to make your party of adventurers entirely your own, with 10 different jobs to choose from, each with their own unique sets of abilities and spells. While that might not seem like an abundance of options initially, once a character hits level 20, you're able to then change their vocation, starting them back at level 1, but retaining some of their stats and all the abilities and spells they've learned from their old job. This leads to some really in-depth mixing and matching possibilities. It's an incredibly addicting system, and once again, I'm extremely impressed that such an intricate and well crafted mechanic was created at such an early point in the RPG genre's lifespan. I also think that a very underrated aspect of this part of the game is the character creation. Right off the bat, Dragon Quest III allows you to create the members of your party, name them, edit their appearance a bit, and then assign them whatever vocation you want. Obviously, these characters are little more than blank avatars to help you along your adventure. They're not going to have any spoken dialogue or emotional moments like the party members you might find in Metaphor or other modern RPGs, but I was still surprised at how attached I grew to these stupid little blank slate characters. I named them after some of my best friends, and in a weird way, it actually felt like I was kind of adventuring with them throughout my playthrough. Also got a lot of enjoyment out of breaking the news to one of them in real life that I unfortunately had to make him into a priest. Hey, the party really needed a healer, okay? All this is to say that the combat and party systems in Dragon Quest III are remarkably in-depth. They're quick to pick up, but difficult to master, the surest sign of a great RPG mechanic. Another aspect of the game I really want to highlight is just how breathtaking its world is. Right from the jump, Dragon Quest III makes it clear that this is going to be a massive, epic odyssey. The world map in the game feels huge, and not to beat a dead horse, but again, it's especially impressive considering the original game's age. The terrains are vast and varied, as your adventure will have you traveling across the sea, over mountains, and through harsh deserts. Even more impressive, though, are the various towns and cities that are plentifully scattered across the land. Each one feels distinct and charming in its own way, and speaking with the NPCs in a town or a city gives the impression that each settlement actually has its own customs and culture. The bulk of your playtime might be spent out in the wilds fighting enemies and leveling up, but I began to look forward to finding a new town more than almost any other aspect of the game. Stumbling into a town after a long trek and numerous tough battles always felt great and like an essential part of the experience for me. Comparatively speaking, with many modern day RPGs, I often find myself flying through the town or city sections, just stopping by to rest up, sell my junk, and then get back to the action. But with Dragon Quest III, I truly cherish these sections of the game, always stopping to check if the vendors had anything good, speak with all the townsfolk, and scour the area for any treasure. I was already in love with the world of Dragon Quest III and thought that I had a solid grasp on what the gameplay loop was going to look like for the rest of the game, only to realize about 10 hours in that I had only scratched the surface. After the first couple of dungeons, you gain access to your ship, and that's when the impressiveness of the world really sets in. Sailing across the seas and exploring the multiple different landmasses makes this game truly feel like a grand adventure. I'm a sucker for any adventure game that has you sailing the seas, and Dragon Quest III makes it feel every bit as magical and freeing as it should. And finally, the last point I want to talk about, the aspect that holds together everything else that I've mentioned previously, the difficulty. Man, this game is hard. Dragon Quest III is not afraid to kick your ass, and I love that about it. Tackling the game's first official dungeon was a humbling experience for me. The game doesn't tell you this, but it certainly expects you to put in some level grinding work between dungeons, or you're going to have a bad time. Even if you are adequately leveled, the game fully expects you to manage your team wisely and learn which strategies are most effective against which enemies. In other words, simple button mashing won't get you far here. Some people might be turned off by needing to put in time level grinding, but I was all for it. Combat is quick and snappy enough to not make it feel too tedious, and watching your party level up and learn new abilities is rewarding enough to make it all feel worth it. This is a game where you can tangibly feel your party getting stronger. Every level and stat increase feels like it really matters when you're facing such tough challenges. The difficulty of this game is an essential part of the experience in my eyes, and is something that ties all of the game's other components together wonderfully. It's like the glue that holds the Dragon Quest III experience together, and even though it was a bit of a shock to the system at first, it ended up coming to be one of my favorite parts of the experience. Finally defeating a boss that has kicked your ass repeatedly feels awesome, and overcoming a difficult challenge in this game always had me eager for the next one. I might not have experienced the original title, but I am certainly glad that I am now getting to play the classic that is Dragon Quest III. We'll see if my love for the title remains as strong throughout the entirety of my playthrough, but at this point in time, I can definitely understand how this game is hailed as one of the greatest RPGs of all time.